Welcome, dear listeners, to today's deep dive episode. Together, we are going to explore the tangled web of sin, shame, redemption, and human resilience woven by Nathaniel Hawthorne in his masterpiece, The Scarlet Letter. I am your host, and over the next hour we will travel back to 17th century Boston. We will walk the narrow, cold streets of a Puritan settlement and sit beside the scaffold where Hester Prynne stands trembling under the heavy, judging gaze of an entire town. From there we will step into the deep forest, where the wind whispers secrets that the rigid, structured world refuses to hear. Along the way we will meet the three central figures of this tragedy, Hester, Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale, and the vengeful Roger Chillingworth, unpack the heavy symbolism of the Scarlet Letter, follow the bright yet troubled spirit of Little Pearl, and connect Hawthorne's literary craft to modern ideas about meaning, guilt, and social stigma. By the end of this episode you will have a richer understanding of why the Scarlet Letter still feels urgent today, why its characters continue to haunt our cultural imagination, and how the novel speaks to contemporary conversations about gender, power, and the search for purpose. Let us begin with a quick snapshot of the world that birthed Hawthorne's story. In the early 1600s, a group of English Puritans crossed the Atlantic Ocean seeking a city upon a hill. They wanted a community built on strict covenant theology, the belief that God had entered into a binding, sacred agreement with the chosen people of New England. This was a world governed by the general court, a hybrid of legislative assembly and congregational church that controlled both civic law and spiritual discipline. The legal code, known as the Body of Liberties and enacted in 1641, codified their moral expectations. There was no room for blasphemy, no breaking of the Sabbath, and absolutely no adultery. Punishments were not private, they were public spectacles designed to reinforce conformity through total humiliation. The scaffold, the stocks, and the pillory all served as theatrical stages where the community could watch a transgression being exposed and, ideally, corrected through shame. Into this austere, suffocating setting steps a young woman named Hester Prynne. She arrives on a cold February morning, clutching her newborn daughter, Pearl, in her arms. Upon her chest she wears a bright red embroidered letter A, a badge of adultery imposed by the magistrates. Imagine the scene, townsfolk gathered in a low murmuring crowd, eyes darting from the vivid scarlet letter to the curious, innocent face of the infant. Standing before her is the minister, Reverend Arthur Dimmesdale, delivering a sermon on the nature of sin while his own heart beats a frantic, terrified rhythm of hidden guilt. And behind them all, a man in a dark coat watches from the shadows, Roger Chillingworth, Hester's estranged husband, returned to Boston under the guise of a learned physician, already turning toward a dark and calculated revenge. Why does Hawthorne choose to focus on these three specific lives? Because each person represents a distinct response to moral failure. Each illustrates a different psychological mechanism, and together they form a triadic dynamic that drives the emotional engine of the novel. Hester's punishment is overt, visible, and externalized. She bears the scarlet letter like a physical wound that never heals, yet she refuses to name the father of her child, protecting Dimmesdale's reputation at great personal cost. Her daily existence becomes a grueling study in endurance. She supports herself and Pearl through needlework, walks the lonely outskirts of town, and meets the governor's emissaries with quiet, unbreakable dignity. Slowly she transforms the symbol of shame into a marker of resilience. Over time the townspeople begin to whisper that the A stands for able rather than adulteress. This shift is not granted by any religious authority, it is earned through Hester's consistent acts of charity, her willingness to tend to the sick, comfort the poor, and offer a listening ear to those cast aside. In Hawkinsonian terms, Hester reauthors her own narrative, turning a tool of oppression into a banner of empowerment. Arthur Dimmesdale, on the other hand, embodies the agony of concealed hypocrisy. He is a revered minister whose sermons condemn sin while he himself hides a secret that gnaws at his soul like a parasite. His internal torment eventually manifests physically, trembling hands, a persistent cough, and a mysterious chest wound that seems to bleed without any physical cause. Psychologists would call this neurotic guilt, a form of self-inflicted punishment that intensifies because it remains unacknowledged. Dimsdale's sermons become paradoxical performances. When he preaches about the dangers of adultery, his voice trembles and his eyes dart to the pews. The congregation, unaware of his private anguish, lauds him as a paragon of virtue. The tension between his public persona and his private reality creates a psychological prison far more confining than any literal stock. As the novel progresses, his health deteriorates, his sleep fragments, and his mind spirals into a vortex of self-flagellation. It is only in the final act, standing beside Hester on the scaffold, that he finally confesses, though his confession arrives too late to spare his own body. He collapses and dies, a tragic illustration of how hidden guilt can erode both spirit and flesh. Roger Chillingworth offers a third, darker perspective, showing a transformation from wounded scholar into obsessive avenger. When he first appears, he presents himself as a man of learning, a physician who claims to practice the art of healing. Yet beneath that calm exterior lies a burning desire for retribution. He discovers Dimsdale's secret not through sudden confession but through a slow, methodical process of careful observation and probing questions cleverly disguised as medical consultations. As time passes, Chillingworth's obsession becomes his entire identity. His physical appearance shifts, features grow gaunt, eyes take on a predatory gleam, as he manipulates Dimsdale's conscience, turning the minister's inner guilt into a psychological weapon that tears him apart from the inside out. In the end, Chillingworth's vengeance consumes him just as much as it does his victim. Once Dimsdale dies, Chillingworth loses his only purpose, his vigor fades, and he dies a few weeks later, serving as a haunting cautionary tale that the pursuit of revenge is a self-destructive fire. Now let us turn to the symbols that bind these characters together. The Scarlet Letter itself is far more than a piece of cloth. It is a living emblem that evolves as the narrative breathes. In the opening chapters, the letter A is described as a vivid splash of crimson against the drab, gray backdrop of the Puritan town, a constant visual reminder of Hester's transgression. Its elaborate embroidery contrasts sharply with the severe aesthetic of the community, signaling Hester's status as an outsider and foreshadowing her capacity for creative resistance. As the story unfolds, the meaning of the letter mutates. Some townspeople begin to say it now stands for Abel, others whisper that it means angel. The letter becomes a mirror, reflecting not just Hester's sin but the shifting attitudes of the community around her. By the epilogue, the Scarlet Letter is displayed in a museum as a relic of a bygone era, yet its legacy continues to provoke deep debates about morality, punishment, and the possibility of redemption. Pearl, the child born of Hester's illicit love, serves as the living embodiment of that Scarlet Letter. From her first appearance, she is described as a wild, untamed spirit, dressed in a crimson gown that mirrors her mother's mark. The townsfolk label her an elf child or demonic figure because she defies every conventional behavior they value. She runs barefoot through the forest, clutches the letter, and asks probing questions that adults are too afraid to answer. Pearl's intuition is almost uncanny. She senses Dimsdale's hidden guilt long before anyone else does. In one pivotal scene, she refuses to approach Dimsdale until he publicly acknowledges his sin, demanding absolute honesty as a condition for her affection. In this way, Pearl functions as a moral catalyst, forcing the adult characters to confront truths they have suppressed. As she matures, she inherits Hester's property, marries, and eventually leaves Boston, suggesting that the legacy of sin can be reconciled through time, acceptance, and societal integration. The forest, another recurring motif, offers a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere of the town. Within its deep shadows, the rigid Puritan codes begin to loosen, allowing Hester and Dimsdale brief, precious moments of authentic connection. Their clandestine meetings among the trees symbolize a space where true selves can surface, free from prying, judgmental eyes. The forest is also where Pearl truly thrives, running wild and laughing, embodying a natural morality that stands in direct opposition to the artificial moral theater of the town. Hawthorne uses this dichotomy to critique the Puritan tendency to equate outward conformity with inner righteousness, reminding us that genuine virtue often dwells in the margins, far from institutional scrutiny. Beyond the immediate plot, Hawthorne's narrative technique deserves special attention. He employs an omniscient narrator who slips seamlessly into the minds of his characters, revealing innermost thoughts while maintaining a lyrical, almost poetic prose style. This narrative choice allows us to experience the painful dissonance between public performance and private suffering. Hawthorne's use of free indirect discourse blends the narrator's voice with character interiority, creating a psychological realism that anticipates modern literary techniques. The result is a layered reading experience where every description of a scarred heart, a trembling hand, or a glint of sunlight on the river carries symbolic weight, inviting contemplation of the deeper moral currents flowing beneath the story's surface. Now let us connect Hawthorne's exploration of sin and redemption to broader philosophical and psychological frameworks that have emerged since his time. One such framework is Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, which posits that humans possess an innate will to meaning. Frankl argues that even in the most harrowing circumstances individuals can discover purpose through love. There is a quiet power in the way Hawthorne weaves the Scarlet Letter, not just as a tale of sin and punishment, but as a mirror held up to the human struggle for meaning in the face of suffering. Long before Frankl penned Man's Search for Meaning, Hawthorne was exploring the same existential terrain, how we confront guilt, endure pain, and either rise above torment or let it consume us. Picture Hester Prynne on that scaffold, the crimson A blazing against her chest like a brand. To the Puritans it is a mark of shame, to Hester it becomes something else entirely. She does not merely wear it, she transforms it. With every stitch she sews for the poor, every act of quiet defiance, she turns that symbol of condemnation into one of resilience. Frankl would later argue that suffering, when met with conscious choice, can become the very soil in which meaning takes root. Hester embodies this. Her suffering does not break her, it forges her. Arthur Dimmesdale, the minister whose guilt festers in the shadows, carries his sin like a hidden wound. The longer he conceals it, the more it poisons him. His confession comes too late, an echo of Frankl's warning that unprocessed guilt metastasizes into despair. Dimmesdale's arc is a cautionary tale. The weight of secrets can crush the spirit long before the body gives out. Roger Chillingworth, his life becomes a single, obsessive quest for vengeance, and in the end he possesses nothing, not even satisfaction. Frankl would call this the ultimate existential failure. When meaning is reduced to destruction, it leaves only emptiness. Chillingworth's fate reminds us that revenge is a fire that burns the arsonist first. Hawthorne's genius does not stop at psychology. Feminist critics have long hailed Hester as a proto-feminist icon, a woman who refuses to be crushed by the patriarchal machinery of her time. When she stands on the scaffold she does not name Dimmesdale, not to protect him, but to expose the hypocrisy of a system that brands women while letting men escape unscathed. Today we see a similar dynamic in the digital age, where cancel culture doles out public shame like a modern Scarlet Letter. The psychological toll, anxiety, depression, the gnawing sense of being forever marked, mirrors Dimmesdale's hidden agony. The difference is that the scaffold is now a viral tweet and the crowd the entire internet. Queer theory pushes this further, peeling back layers of desire and identity. Hester and Dimmesdale's relationship exists outside the rigid confines of Puritan marriage, a quiet rebellion against heteronormative dogma. Pearl, Wild and Untamed, can be read as an early glimpse of non-binary identity, a living challenge to binary rules. In a world that demands labels, Pearl simply is, a defiant symbol of fluidity in a culture obsessed with control. Now step back and look at the Puritan community itself. Michel Foucault would call it a moral panopticon, a society where everyone is both prisoner and guard, where conformity is enforced not just by law but by ever-watchful neighbors. The scaffold scenes are not merely punishments, they are theater designed to remind everyone that deviation will be met with collective wrath. Yet Hawthorne exposes cracks in the system. The ministers who preach virtue are as flawed as the sinners they condemn. The laws that criminalize adultery ignore power imbalances that let men escape scrutiny. The more the Puritans cling to moral authority, the more Hawthorne reveals it as a fragile facade masking fear rather than faith. So what does this mean for us centuries later? First, learn to distinguish imposed shame from earned guilt. If you carry the weight of judgment, Whether because of a mistake, a choice, or simply who you are, ask yourself, is this my burden, or theirs? Hester's scarlet letter was meant to break her, instead she redefined it. You can do the same. Take what others intend as a weapon and turn it into armor. Second, forgiveness is not only something you beg from others, it is something you give yourself. Hester's strength did not come from the town's absolution, it came from her own resolve to move forward. If you are haunted by past mistakes, ask, what would it look like to forgive myself? Perhaps it is writing it down, talking it through, or simply deciding that your worth isn't defined by your worst moment. Third, beware the seduction of revenge. Chillingworth thought vengeance would fill the hollow inside him, instead it carved him out entirely. Anger is a spark, it can warm you or burn your house down. The choice is yours. Now let us return to the world that shaped Hawthorne's story. The year is 1630. A fleet of ships carries Puritan settlers across the Atlantic, fleeing persecution in England. Their leader, John Winthrop, declares their mission, to build a city upon a hill, a beacon of godly virtue for the world to see. The vision is grand, the reality brutal. The New England wilderness is unforgiving, cold, harsh, a land that tests faith at every turn. Disease, starvation, and conflict with native tribes thin the ranks. Yet the colonists cling to their ideals, convinced that suffering is divine proof of righteousness. In this world the law is not merely order, it is control. Adultery is not just a sin, it is a threat to the social fabric. The Scarlet Letter is therefore a warning. This is what happens when you step out of line. Hawthorne knows the truth. No system is as pure as it claims. The ministers who condemn Hester are men with their own secrets. The laws that bind her are written by those who benefit from her silence. The harsh realities of colonial life, scarce resources, disease, and the ever-present fear of conflict, shaped a society built on survival above all else. Every action was measured not just by immediate consequence but by its potential to disrupt the fragile balance of community life. Settlers clung to strict moral codes, enforced through statutes like the Body of Liberties, which treated sin as a public danger. To them immorality was contagious, capable of unraveling the very fabric of society. It is within this climate of fear and control that Hester steps onto the scaffold, infant in arms, scarlet letter blazing on her chest. Her punishment is not merely retribution, it is a performance, a warning etched in flesh and fabric, designed to restore order by making shame visible to all. Nathaniel Hawthorne knew this world intimately, not only through history but through blood. Born and raised in Salem, Massachusetts, he walked streets still shadowed by the hysteria of the witch trials nearly 2 centuries earlier. One name weighed heavily on him, John Hawthorne, his ancestor, a judge who condemned women to death during those dark days. Though Nathaniel added a W to distance himself, he could not escape the moral weight. That guilt, that unease with absolute judgment, pulses beneath the Scarlet Letter. He does not simply condemn the Puritans, he dissects them. There is scorn for their rigidity, yes, but also reluctant admiration for their conviction, their belief in a moral universe governed by rules. This tension gives the novel its depth, a story torn between condemnation and understanding, between rebellion and reverence. Hawthorne's writing breathes contradiction. On one hand he paints nature as a sanctuary, alive with wild beauty, the forest where Hester and Dimmesdale finally speak truth, the sea that carries whispers of freedom, the sky that opens vast and indifferent above human suffering. These moments glow with romanticism, celebrating emotion, individuality, and the sublime power of the natural world. Yet they stand in sharp contrast to the cold, angular buildings of the town, the prison, the meeting house, the scaffold, all symbols of institutional control. The clash mirrors the broader cultural shift in early America, where romantic ideals began to challenge stern Puritan doctrines. In this way the Scarlet Letter becomes more than a tale of sin and redemption, it is a portrait of a nation wrestling with its soul. At the heart of the novel's artistry lies Hawthorne's masterful use of symbolism. Nothing in his world exists without meaning. Take the rosebush growing beside the prison door, a splash of color against gray stone, blooming defiantly in a place meant for punishment. It suggests that even in the harshest conditions beauty and hope may take root. Or consider the meteor that blazes across the night sky at the moment of Dimmesdale's midnight confession, a fleeting streak of light interpreted differently by each observer. To some it marks an angel, to Dimmesdale, a divine indictment. Such ambiguity reflects the instability of truth itself, shaped by perspective and burdened by guilt. Even weather becomes a mirror of inner turmoil, storm-tossed seas echo emotional chaos, while thick morning fog cloaks secrets too painful to face. Every detail hums with psychological resonance, turning the external world into a reflection of internal struggle. Nowhere is this symbolic richness more evident than in the evolution of the Scarlet Letter itself. At first it is a brand, an official mark of disgrace imposed by the magistrates, stitched in vivid red cloth meant to burn the eyes and sting the conscience. Its brightness stands out cruelly against drab Puritan attire, a constant reminder of Hester's transgression. Over time something remarkable happens. Hester refuses to let the letter define her solely as adulteress. Through quiet resilience, skilled needlework, and acts of charity she begins to reshape its meaning. The townspeople, once scornful, start to whisper that they now stands for Abel. Others see in her grace an angel. Still others recognize the artistry in her embroidery, the intricate gold thread, delicate flourishes, and call her an artist. Each interpretation is a step toward reclaiming agency, transforming a symbol of shame into one of identity. By the novel's climax, when Dimmesdale finally ascends the scaffold beside her, the Scarlet Letter takes on new dimensions. No longer hers alone, it becomes a shared emblem of suffering and truth. In that moment it ceases to be a tool of isolation and transforms into a testament to human frailty and connection. Their joint revelation turns the scaffold from a site of punishment into a space of catharsis. In the epilogue, long after both have passed, the letter endures, not as a living burden but as a relic. Preserved like an artifact from another age, it serves as a silent witness to what was done, reminding future generations that societies may change, laws may soften, but the echoes of judgment do not fade easily. The scars remain, urging reflection, caution, and perhaps mercy. Pearl, too, undergoes a transformation that parallels the shifting meaning of the letter. From the beginning she is no ordinary child. Wild-eyed, impulsive, darting through the woods like a creature sprung from myth, she seems less a girl than a force of nature, a living embodiment of passion unbound by law or convention. The townspeople regard her with suspicion, calling her an elf child or demon offspring, unable to reconcile her vitality with their rigid notions of purity. Yet she is profoundly perceptive, intuitively aware of the truths adults hide. She points at the letter, demands answers, refuses to accept silence. As she grows her edges soften, intelligence matures into insight, wildness into independence. She remains different, set apart by origin and temperament, but no longer alien. When she marries and leaves Boston, settling across the sea, it marks a quiet triumph. The living Scarlet Letter, once seen as a curse, has found a place beyond judgment. Her departure suggests that healing is possible, that children born of transgression are not doomed to carry their parents' sins forever, if given time, space, and love. Redemption, Hawthorne implies, is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is as simple as a young woman walking away from the past, building a life where no one knows her mother's shame. Beneath the surface of plot and setting, the Scarlet Letter thrums with psychological complexity. Modern readers repeatedly apply frameworks from psychology to uncover hidden currents driving its characters. Through a Freudian lens, Hester emerges as a figure of remarkable psychological balance. Her ego, the rational self, navigates between opposing forces, the superego, represented by the punishing moral authority of the community, and the id, the raw desire that led her to Dimmesdale. Unlike others, she does not break under pressure. Instead, she integrates her experience, forging a new self from the wreckage of condemnation. She neither denies her passion nor surrenders to guilt, achieving a rare kind of wholeness. Dimmesdale, in stark contrast, collapses under the weight of his divided self. His superego dominates, waging war against desires he cannot admit. He preaches holiness while harboring secret sin, and the dissonance eats away at him. His body betrays his mind, health deteriorates, voice trembles, hands clutch his heart as if trying to hold together a soul tearing apart. This is not mere guilt, it is psychosomatic illness, a textbook case of conversion disorder, where emotional trauma manifests as physical pain. His nightly vigils on the scaffold, his self-flagellation, his whispered confessions to darkness, all are symptoms of a man tortured by invisible chains. He is punished not by law but by his own inability to reconcile who he is with who he believes he must be. Chillingworth's descent is quieter but no less tragic. Once a scholar detached and cerebral, he becomes consumed by obsession. His marriage to Hester was loveless, a mismatch of youth and age, passion and intellect. When he discovers her infidelity, buried emotions, jealousy, humiliation, rage erupts. Jung would call this the eruption of the shadow, the unconscious part containing everything we deny. Chillingworth allows this shadow to take over, shedding his former identity and becoming a predator stalking Dimmesdale with calculated precision, feeding on his guilt. Over time his face twists, his posture bends, as if the evil he nurtures reshapes him physically. He does not merely punish Dimmesdale, he loses himself in the act of vengeance, becoming the monster he sought to expose. Pearl functions as something deeper than a child. Archetypally she resembles the anima, the feminine aspect of the psyche that connects the conscious mind to the unconscious. She appears at moments of crisis, speaking truths no one else dares utter. She pulls back veils, forces confrontations, insists on honesty. For Hester she is both joy and torment, a constant reminder of what was lost and gained. For Dimmesdale she is a mirror, reflecting the fatherhood he denies. Her presence compels both parents to face parts of themselves they would rather forget. Without her the novel's psychological drama would lack its most potent catalyst. Even newer concepts such as moral injury find unexpected relevance in Hawthorne's century-old tale. Originally developed to understand trauma experienced by soldiers who violate their own ethical codes, the idea applies strikingly to Dimmesdale. His sin is not just adultery, it is silence. He violates his deepest beliefs by refusing to confess, letting Hester bear the burden alone. That breach of integrity corrodes him from within. He suffers not because God punishes him, but because he cannot live authentically. His sermons grow more powerful precisely because they are laced with personal agony, yet each word spoken in falsehood deepens his wound. Hester, too, bears a form of moral injury, not from her actions but from how she is treated. The community imposes a profound injustice, branding her immoral while excusing the man who shared her crime. This external violation, being stripped of dignity, autonomy, and voice, leaves lasting damage. She survives, but not unscathed. The shame imposed becomes a kind of internal exile, a separation from full belonging that persists long after the letter is no longer forced upon her. Her resilience is heroic, but it comes at a cost. The novel does not offer easy forgiveness or tidy resolutions, instead it asks us to consider the long aftermath of judgment, the ways punishment can linger far beyond its intended duration. What does the Scarlet Letter tell us about our digital age? Today, social media platforms forge new arenas of public shaming that echo the colonial scaffold. A single tweet can affix a modern Scarlet Letter upon someone, unleashing endless commentary, memes, and cancel campaigns. The psychological toll of such digital ostracism mirrors Hester's ordeal: loss of privacy, relentless reminders of perceived wrongdoing, and pressure to either withdraw into silence or reshape one's identity. Yet, just as Hester transformed her emblem through compassionate deeds, we can counter online stigma by embracing authenticity, contributing positively to our communities, and reframing narratives that seek to define us. In this way, the novel stands as both cautionary tale and guidebook for navigating reputation in an era where information spreads instantly and permanence feels inevitable. Consider also how the novel intersects with contemporary conversations about restorative justice. Restorative justice stresses repairing harm through dialogue, accountability, and community involvement rather than punitive isolation. Hester's eventual reintegration into Boston, nurtured by charitable labor and the gradual softening of public sentiment, mirrors a restorative process. Dimsdale's belated confession, though tragically mistimed, can be read as an earnest attempt at restitution. By publicly acknowledging his role, he seeks to restore moral equilibrium. Chillingworth's refusal to enter any restorative dialogue, choosing instead to perpetuate vengeance, exposes the destructive trajectory of retributive justice. By placing these outcomes side by side, Hawthorne invites us to weigh which avenues foster genuine healing and which merely entrench cycles of pain. Turning to the novel's reach into later literature and popular culture, the Scarlet has endured as an iconic symbol, appearing in countless adaptations, from early silent films to modern television series, from stage productions to graphic novels. Each rendition refracts the symbol through its own cultural lens, sometimes highlighting romance, sometimes foregrounding feminist rebellion, sometimes underscoring the horror of moral policing. The themes echo in works such as Toni Morrison's Beloved, where the specter of a past transgression haunts a community, and Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which examines state-imposed shame and bodily control. Contemporary music videos invoke the Scarlet Letter as a metaphor for personal branding gone awry. This intertextual presence testifies to the universality of Hawthorne's concern, how societies label, punish, and occasionally redeem those who deviate from prescribed norms. As we approach the close of our exploration, let us distill the key takeaways. First, the Scarlet Letter reminds us that sin is not merely an outward act but an inner condition capable of manifesting in many guises: public shame, concealed guilt, obsessive revenge. Second, the novel shows that symbols are mutable. A badge of disgrace can evolve into a beacon of strength when its bearer redefines its meaning through lived action. Third, the psychological arcs of Hester, Dimsdale, and Chillingworth trace three distinct pathways: resilient adaptation, self-destructive concealment, and corrosive vengeance. Fourth, Hawthorne's narrative urges us to examine mechanisms of social control, public shaming, legal statutes, religious dogma, and to question whether they truly foster moral betterment or simply sustain existing power structures. Fifth, the story's relevance endures because modern societies continue to wrestle with gendered punishment, digital stigma, and the search for authentic meaning amid external pressures. Before we sign off, I'd like to offer a reflective exercise inspired by both Hawthorne and Frankel. Pause for a moment and consider your own personal Scarlet Letter, a time when you felt judged, shamed, or isolated. Note 3 ways you have responded to that experience. A coping strategy that helped you endure. B, a pattern of thought that may have kept you trapped. And C, an action you could take now to transmute that symbol into something empowering. This simple practice echoes Hester's needlework. You take a painful thread and weave it into new fabric, forging meaning from adversity. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Scarlet Letter. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please subscribe, share the episode with fellow literature lovers, and let us know in the comments which character's arc resonated most with you. Until next time, keep questioning, keep reading, and remember that even the brightest Scarlet Letters can illuminate paths to redemption when we dare to look beyond the surface. As we step back from the cloth, let us linger a little longer in the world Hawthorne painstakingly reconstructed. Imagine walking down those narrow Boston lanes, where every uneven cobblestone seemed to echo with the heavy footfalls of unseen judgment. To truly grasp the crushing weight placed upon Hester Prynne, we must look past the surface and examine the rigid legal framework of 17th-century Puritan Massachusetts. These were not merely laws meant to punish bad behavior. They were deeply theological, built on a belief system that tied civil order directly to divine will. In their eyes, breaking a rule was the same as defying God himself. Under the official statutes of the time, adultery carried a death sentence for both parties. Yet when the court handed down its verdict, it made a stark and painful contradiction. Dimsdale walks free while Hester is forced to wear the scarlet brand. This selective enforcement was never about mercy. It protected a patriarchal story that shifted the entire moral burden onto women, leaving them to carry visible shame while men kept their reputations safely tucked away. Writing in the middle of the 1800s, Hawthorne felt this dissonance in his own bones. He knew exactly how heavy that legacy could be. His family tree reached back to judges who presided over the infamous witch trials, an inheritance that haunted him for years. In his private letters he confessed that this book was essentially a reckoning with his own family history. He described stitching the story together with the very same scarlet thread that Hester wears. By weaving his personal guilt into the broader fabric of colonial justice, he elevated the tale far beyond simple historical fiction, turning it into a deep psychological examination that asks us to look inward rather than merely point fingers outward. Then there is Pearl, the child born from that forbidden union. She moves along the edges of the forest like a living breath of both sin and salvation. Her name itself holds a quiet secret. Just as a pearl forms inside an oyster after a grain of sand causes irritation, beauty emerges from pain. Pearl is far more than a walking metaphor. She acts as a relentless mirror, forcing the adults around her to face truths they desperately try to hide. When she slips into the wilderness, she is not merely fleeing the watchful eyes of the townspeople, she steps into a natural world that plays by entirely different rules. Out there, authenticity matters more than fitting in. This quiet rebellion hints at a larger shift in human thought, foreshadowing a time when writers would celebrate nature as a true sanctuary for the restless soul, long before such ideas became popular. What makes this story so enduring is how closely it mirrors our modern understanding of the human mind. Look at Dimmesdale pacing through the dark hours, starving himself and whispering desperate prayers in secret. Today we would recognize those habits as a form of self-punishment, a way to cope with unbearable guilt by turning pain inward. Then consider Chillingworth, whose slow descent into obsession reads like a clear case of fixation. His single-minded hunt for hidden sin consumes him completely, stripping away every trace of compassion until he becomes nothing more than a shadow driven by revenge. And through it all stands Hester. She begins as a marked outcast, pushed to the fringes of society, yet slowly transforms into a quiet pillar of strength. By choosing to help others and offer charity despite her suffering, she demonstrates a profound kind of resilience, showing how people can forge purpose from their deepest wounds. The tensions Hawthorne captured on the page were not invented out of thin air. They were alive in the real streets and meeting halls of the era. Surviving town records from 1656 reveal communities fiercely debating these exact issues. Ministers and elders argued late into the evening over whether public humiliation should be paired with physical punishment or replaced with hard labor meant to repair damage. Some believed the scarlet mark served a necessary teaching purpose, a constant visual reminder to keep everyone on the righteous path. Others worried it would breed hypocrisy, allowing people to wear the badge without ever truly changing their hearts. These archival arguments prove that the central question, does public condemnation actually lead to inner transformation, was not merely a literary exercise but a pressing civic dilemma shaping daily life. Over the generations since the book first hit the shelves, artists have continually returned to its symbols, each era painting the scarlet letter in a new light. In the silent films of 1926 starring Lillian Gish, the story leaned heavily into sweeping visual drama. The letter itself became a glowing beacon cutting through darkness, suggesting redemption could be found through public exposure and spectacle. Decades later, a stage production in 1979 transformed Hester's meticulous needlework into a choreographed dance, implying a woman could reclaim power through creative expression and movement. More recently, contemporary digital creators have reimagined the iconic letter as a flickering, glitching hashtag, directly speaking to our current age, showing how quickly social platforms can amplify, distort, and mutate personal stigmas. Each version proves the symbol Hawthorne crafted is remarkably fluid, shifting between a tool of oppression and a badge of empowerment depending on the culture holding it up. Finally, the novel's deep exploration of faith and community invites us to draw lines across cultures. Take the Japanese concept of han, which describes a profound sense of lingering shame intertwined with a deep longing for healing and reconciliation. Though arising from different traditions, it echoes the emotional landscape Hester navigates throughout her life. Both paths acknowledge that carrying a heavy mark does not have to mean permanent ruin, instead it can become the starting point for a long, difficult journey toward wholeness. The story reminds us that judgment may carve the initial wound, but quiet work of endurance, empathy, and honest reflection ultimately shapes who we become. These themes of ritual practices are not isolated incidents. Looking back at medieval Europe, we see a striking parallel in the practice of penance. Sinners were often forced to perform public acts of contrition to prove remorse. This echoes Dimmesdale's secret sermons, which were not just religious duties but covert penitential offerings, a hidden way to bleed out his guilt before a congregation unaware of his crime. Mapping these cross-cultural analogues reveals that mechanisms of guilt and redemption are not quirks of a small New England village. They constitute a universal human dialect, a language of shame and longing that speaks across borders and centuries. Bringing this conversation into the present day, we see the Scarlet Letter's digital incarnation in online reputation. Today we call it cancel culture. With lightning-fast dissemination of accusations and the cold reality of digital ostracism, it mirrors the colonial scaffold of public shaming almost perfectly. But there is a key difference. Unlike the static embroidered A, modern stigmas are fluid. They can be edited, deleted, or repurposed with a single click. Media scholars suggest this volatility is a double-edged sword. It can amplify harm, but also offers unprecedented avenues for reclamation, much like Hester's eventual choice to wear the letter voluntarily. By choosing to keep it, she stripped the symbol of its punitive power. The lesson is clear: agency does not lie in the symbol itself, but in the narrative we construct around it. Finally, we must consider the lasting legacy of Nathaniel Hawthorne within American Romanticism and symbolism. While contemporaries such as Edgar Allan Poe delved into Gothic terror, Hawthorne turned his gaze inward. He used the Scarlet Letter as a microcosm of national identity, proposing that America's moral foundation was built upon concealed transgressions. This notion was later echoed by Nathaniel Benedict in essays on the American sin and explored further by Toni Morrison in works on collective memory. In this sense, the Scarlet Letter serves as an early blueprint for the nation's ongoing, often painful dialogue with its own myths and misdeeds. As you reflect on all these layers, from rigid legal history and familial hauntings to psychological nuances, artistic reinterpretations, and modern digital parallels, consider how each adds texture to that simple red letter. What began as a brutal punishment evolved into something far more complex. It reminds us that symbols, like stories, are never truly finished. They evolve with every new reader, every passing era, and every act of bearing witness. May your engagement with Hawthorne's work continue to uncover hidden depths and challenge entrenched assumptions. Perhaps, in stitching your own scarlet threads, you will discover a pattern of resilience that transcends time.